Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. You have tuned in to weekly podcast episode number 70 of Hooked on Wooden Boats. I'm your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, nobody can, although millions and millions and millions have unsuccessfully tried. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden boats all over the world. Thanks for joining the show today. It's great to have you. It's been a fun and adventurous week in the wooden boat world again. This happens week after week. It's amazing. This week's featured segment is an interview with Tyson Trudel of the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle, Washington. Tyson is the youth education manager at the Center for Wooden Boats. He's been there for a year or two, doing a great job. He's got a really fun history. He spent some time on the Lady Washington, tall ship, got his captain's license, lots of cool stuff, so stick around for that interview. I have to apologize again this week. I've got a little cold, so my voice is a little raspy. I got over my cold in about 3 weeks, and then about 3 days later it came back, so go figure. I guess washing my hands every 10 minutes all day wasn't enough. I don't know. Anyway, I am alive and well, though, so that's good. Let's see. I want to give you a short update on my sassafras 12-foot lap straight canoe. I finished building the thwart. It's hourglass shaped with a bead of, what's that stuff called? Purple heart down the center. Got it all shaped and sanded and got it attached to the boat. I had to put screws from underneath into the gunnels, and that was a little tricky. My drill wouldn't fit at the right angle, so I had to drill it with the Dremel tool, which worked pretty cool. Took me a while to figure that out, but the Dremel can definitely come in handy sometimes. Next up with the canoe is another coat of paint on the hull, which I'll probably do this week, and then it's on to varnishing. The problem is the cold weather we're having. It's in the 20s and 30s at night. It just doesn't go well with varnishing, so I may be on hold for a little bit for the varnishing part of the boat. But it's looking good. I'm pretty excited to get it finished and in the water. Wanted to give you the wooden boat hack of the week, number 13. You might call this one a mini hack, but it's still a hack. And this one is to use tuna cans for mixing your epoxy. The cool thing about this, if you're a tuna lover like I am, you buy canned tuna, a little 5.5 ounce cans or whatever. So you use your tuna and you wash the cans out. And actually I put mine in the dishwasher. And then they make a great container for mixing epoxy because they're made out of metal or aluminum. And they're very shallow and wide. As you probably know, epoxy is exothermic, so it will heat up if you stack it too high in a container. And with these small tuna cans, you can mix 2 or 3 ounces, and it's fairly spread out, so it doesn't heat up real quick. And the other cool thing is when you're done applying the epoxy out of the tuna can, you can simply wipe the tuna can out with a paper towel, and you're good to go for the next time. So you can reuse them, which is pretty cool. So I prefer using those to paper cups and plastic stuff, which is a little more delicate, usually can only be used one time. So there you go. Wooden boat hack number 13. Use tuna cans for mixing your epoxy. And enjoy the tuna while it's going down, okay? Okay, I was talking about the Scamp last week, and I'm planning on building one this year. I think I mentioned that I wasn't going to be able to take the class, but I did get plans and the manual from Josh Colvin, the editor of Small Craft Advisor magazine. So I've started poring over those. And I'm pretty excited. The manual's awesome. The plans are cool. I've got to come up with the money for the kit now. And hopefully my son Josh can pony up half of that. And that would be pretty sweet. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited. I've also joined the message board at Small Craft Advisor magazine. And there's tons of conversations on there about the Scamp, people that are building them, using them. So if you haven't gone there, I'd recommend you do that. Go to smallcraftadvisor.com. Go to the message board menu item at the top. You can register and get on there and start having some conversations if you're interested in the Scamp like me. There's lots of great ideas on there for making the build simpler, some modifications. There's really some crazy modifications on there that I wouldn't personally do, but lots of good tips and tricks, and you can correspond, interact with the people on there, so that's pretty fun. So check it out if you haven't already done so. If you'd like to support the show, please go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/Amazon and make a purchase from Amazon. If you do that, I get paid a small commission, and that's helpful to pay for fuel and podcasting equipment and all that stuff. I would appreciate it. I would like to give out I would like to give a shout out to new subscribers on the show: Jay Hill, Jim Lynch, Robert Doyle, and Doug Eldridge. Welcome to the subscription list, guys. So the deal is I have a monthly newsletter that I send out to subscribers on my e-newsletter list. There's over 200 subscribers now. If you'd like to join that list and get some fun information on a monthly basis, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Give me your name and email address, and you're in like Flint. I wonder who came up with that saying, in like Flint. I suppose I could Google it, have the answer in 0.007 milliseconds or whatever, but I won't right now. I've got some listener feedback here from Kurt Krager. Kurt's from Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and he actually left a voice message on my voicemail feedback hotline. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this message. So take it away, Kurt.
Hi, Dan. I enjoyed listening to your podcast about the tug, called the Elmo rather, and it was very interesting hearing you talk and hearing the owner, Dee and Sarah, was very interesting. I'm calling from Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. I'm a boater myself. And I just sold a 35-foot island packet. It got to be too much for me, but I love working and tinkering on boats and on the water. But hearing the story about Dee and the Sea Scout was so interesting. So I'd like to be able to talk with him sometime if I could. If I can't reach him, give me a call back if you would. My name again is Kurt, K-U-R-T, Krieger of Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. Thanks, Dan.
Well, thank you very much for that note, Kurt. I will get some information to you so you can make contact. Appreciate you listening to the show. Call back again sometime. And for those of you that are listening, you can call anytime. My voicemail feedback number, which is 424-261-2360. That's in the U.S. Or from your computer with a microphone, if you go to my homepage on the right-hand side, is a little strip of what? It's a little red stripe, I guess you could say, that says send voicemail. If you click on that, it'll take you to a page where you can actually record a message from your computer or your smartphone and shoot me a message that way. I'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for the show, if you're having fun listening, if you give me some feedback, if you have some tips about wooden boat building you'd like to share, please shoot them over to me. I'd love to hear from you. We're going to move on to the interview now with Tyson Trudel of Center for Wooden Boats. Take it away, Tyson. Okay, it is December 7th, 2012. I am at the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle in the boat shop with Tyson Trudel. Tyson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Yeah, is this called the boat shop?
It is.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a good guess on my part. It's where you guys work on boats indoors.
Yep.
And smaller boats, well, you could get, what, 25?
The
20,
biggest
20?
boat we've gotten in here is the Betsy D. It's our 35-foot New Haven Sharpie.
Oh, wow.
And a guy, Brad Rice, who used to work here, he shoehorned her in here once.
Really? Yeah. Brad's up on Whidbey Island, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, he's on my short list to interview.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, so Tyson, let's start with tell me where you're from and what you kind of did as a youth.
I grew up in a really small town in eastern Oregon called Cove, so population 500 in a county of 50,000. I was fortunate, though. My folks were sailors, and before we moved to Cove, we had lived in Portland, and we had a 21-foot sailboat. We had a San Juan 21.
Yeah.
And so they took me out sailing on that. So I've been boat obsessed all my life. The second word I ever said was boat. So we had the San Juan 21 on a trailer in our driveway.
Yeah.
In Scappoose, Oregon, and so how they tell me the story is I stood up one day, I looked out the window, and I said, "Daddy's boat," and they're like, "This kid's a sailor."
Yeah, really.
So then we moved to eastern Oregon, and when I was like 7 or 8, we started building a house, a big log house out in the country.
Your family was building it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad took a summer off work and did all the log work, and
wow.
My mom wired the place. And when we moved in, it was all stud walls. It was just the outer log walls, the roof, and just stud walls. And my sister and I would like run through it.
Run through the walls.
Run through the walls and play hide and go seek. But anyway, so as part of this building of the house, we ended up having to sell our sailboat to put in a well. And I was like 7 and in love with the boat. And I was like, "You can't sell the boat. I'll carry water back and forth." and they're like, "No, we need to have a well for the place. We're gonna sell the boat." But my folks are really nice people, and for my 8th birthday, they bought me an 8-foot sailboat.
Oh, nice.
And I was sick, and so I couldn't go outside, and so they brought it into my bedroom and they let me sleep in it, which is probably the worst thing you can do for a boat obsessed kid. It does not help the boat obsession.
Yeah. What kind of boat was it?
It was
fiberglass.
It was a little
type of thing?
fiberglass dinghy. It was called a Jester, and I've looked and looked and looked all over the internet and other things, and I've never seen another one. But it was, pretty classic, like 8 feet, wine glass hull,
Wow.
dagger board, and a little Marconi sail.
Cool.
And then I had that's the boat my dad taught me to sail on. And we'd sail on reservoirs, so it's all, Eastern Oregon, it's pretty dry.
So you weren't close to the Columbia River at that point?
No. So we were outside, we're in Union County, which is like La Grande. It's northeastern Oregon.
Oh, yeah. Is that the what are the mountains? The Umatilla Mountains?
Yeah, we sit between a few. So there's the Grand Ronde Valley, big open space, and then on the north side of that is the Blue Mountains, and on the east is the Elkhorns. Or on the east is the Wallowas, and on the west is the Elkhorns.
Okay, yeah.
I could have that wrong, but that's how I remember.
Yeah.
So there's huge amounts of national forest and wilderness land there. Lots of sailing on reservoirs, and then we did a lot of river running. So we had canoes and drift boats and rafts, and we ran the Deschutes and the Grand Ronde and the John Day.
Wow.
Mostly for fishing. So my dad's a super avid fly fisherman.
Guy.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so it was all our float trips were driven by where the steelhead or salmon fishing was at that time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So you got that boat when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
And a Marconi rig is a sloop rig, is it?
Yeah. So it
had a main and a jib on an 8-foot boat.
Oh. No. Just that it was a cat boat.
Okay.
With just the Marconi is the triangular
shape
versus like a gat.
So.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Got my terms mixed up there.
Yep. Yep.
So you were sailing that when you were 8 years old.
Yep.
And then did you go to high school in that area then?
Yeah. So so that's how I got into building boats. Is I took shop every opportunity I had. So every quarter of junior high, every quarter of high school, and our shop teacher was the assistant principal, and he was gone a lot, so we had very unsupervised shop time. So we got to do all sorts of crazy things in shop. But built 3 or 4 different boats in shop class.
You did?
Yeah.
What kind of boats did you build?
We built a few, like Phil Bolger. We did a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
We did a Bolger Teal. We did this one. We did a little pedal boat. So it was like looking through Popular Mechanics and the magazines for boat plans for free and stuff that we could build out of the supplies that the shop had.
So you're building these out of plywood?
Yeah, plywood.
Exterior grade plywood, probably.
And pine and just whatever was lying around.
Yeah.
So I built
Screwing them together?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and paint
Using
them.
a resorcinol type of glue, or?
No, usually, I mean, this was just like whatever we could find.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah. Not, just, regular waterproof glue.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you did that in high school.
Yep.
And then, so then what happened after that?
So I wanted to be a history teacher. I always liked history. I thought, I'll be a history teacher in high school. That'll be good. And so I pursued that path for 2 years, and then
You went to college? Somewhere?
I went to college.
Where'd you go?
I went to 2 places. I went to a place called Trinity Lutheran College in Issaquah.
Oh, that's in Issaquah.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, now it's in Everett. They moved it to Everett.
Oh, okay. I knew I'd seen that somewhere.
But and then I went to Eastern Oregon State College for a year, and got to the point where I was like, I don't know. I want to do something that's a little more engaging, like doing stuff, taking people out on trips, that kind of thing. And so, like I said, I've always liked boats. So I got to thinking, okay, kids and boats. How do I do kids and boats? And I didn't know. I know people do this, but I don't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. But I knew that the Center for Wooden Boats did that, because I'd been up to visit and see it, and so I thought, well, I'll ask them if they'd consider having somebody as an apprentice.
And approximately what year was this?
This was 1997.
Okay.
So I was like, if I can just go somewhere that does it and just work super entry level and just get to see how it works, then I can figure out what I need to do from there. So I wrote Dick Wagner a letter.
And Dick founded the Center for Wooden Boats back in the 70s.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I wrote Dick a letter and I said, hey Dick, would you consider having an apprentice for youth programs in boat building? And he wrote me back and he said, yes, we would definitely consider that. And would you like to be the night watchman? Because we don't have a night watchman right now for the place. And so you could come up.
In other words, come and watch the facility
Yep.
at night, be here on site to make sure nothing bad's happening.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so now you're a security guard and a wooden boat guy at the same time.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And so I was like, yeah, that's great, because then I don't have to find a place to live. And so I came up in, I think it was the fall of 97. Yeah, fall of 97, and I was here for 8 months, and I worked in the shop, and I helped out with youth programs, and I figured out what I didn't know, and I figured out a path. So I was like,
what you didn't know in terms of what?
Of how to proceed. I knew I wanted to work with kids in both, but I had no idea
how to make that a vocation.
Exactly.
Make money, get paid
for. Yes, there you go. How to use modern terminology, how to monetize that desire.
Yeah, exactly.
So I figured out, that you're never going to make a lot of money doing that, but if it did a few things, there were some things that I could do that would make it more likely. And the 2 big things that came out of that were, I should definitely finish college and get some kind of academic credibility.
Okay.
And then get a captain's license, which was something that I always wanted to do since I found out that you could be a captain.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do that.
So now why did you decide that you thought you needed a captain's license or you wanted a captain's license? Or
both.
And why did you need one? I'm just curious.
I felt like I needed one because at that point, I wasn't sure if I was going to land doing boat building stuff with kids or doing on the water, taking folks out on the water.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought that would be a good skill set and a way to make money. I thought, if I get my captain's license, I can work on boats and maybe either work on boats with kids or use that to subsidize working with kids.
Okay.
So I thought about it. I thought about myself, and I said, okay, I need to. If I go to sea now to get the time together to get a captain's license, I probably won't go back to college. So I thought I should go to college first and then go to sea. Because to get a captain's license, you have to, the entry-level one, you have to have 365 days of sea time in a 5-year period to qualify for it.
Wow.
So I knew I was going to have to spend a lot of time at sea to get that time together. And I thought, okay, I should go to college first, finish college, and then go to sea. So I did that. I went back to school, and I got a degree in youth work.
Where'd you get that at?
I went back to Trinity Lutheran College.
You did? Okay.
Yep. And then I got a great job out of college. I got a job running the adventure program and ropes course at a summer camp in Bellingham.
Really?
Yeah.
And ropes is the balancing fitness thing that part of the... Is that...
Kind of. That's the activity.
Yeah.
The structure is so... And this is a big passion of mine. This is how I got into what I consider myself to be, other than a boat builder, is an experiential educator. So there's this really fascinating field of experiential education, which has a really interesting connection to boats. So... most people are familiar with Outward Bound.
Right.
So the guy who founded Outward Bound is a guy named Kurt Hahn. And so Kurt Hahn, he was an educator in Germany in the 30s and left Germany in the 30s because of, the tension that was happening in Germany in the 30s. He moved to England, and he was running boys' schools, and he was looking at what was happening with the youth at that time, and particularly around youth who were going into the maritime field. And they had noticed in World War I that the folks that had come up and learned to be sailors in the age of sail had a much higher survival rate when their ships were torpedoed in World War I than those folks who had come up in steam power. So they looked at it, they're like, okay, so these guys, the older guys who came up under sail, they did so much better, like 5-1 better than the folks who came up under sea. And they're like, why is that? And they looked at it and they're like, the teamwork involved in sailing vessels, the physical work involved in sailing vessels. So Kurt Hahn was trying to think of ways that they could put that back. They could put those things back, the teamwork and the physicality and the challenge back in training for youth. And he, as an outgrowth of that, started the first Outward Bound school in a place called Gordonston in Scotland. And then Outward Bound has grown over the years. And it's that idea of experience as a teaching tool. One of my guiding principles in what I do is a Kurt Hahn saying, it's that we're doing education through the sea, not for the sea. So we're trying to use, in maritime-focused experiential education, we're using the great experience of either building a boat or operating a boat to teach self-confidence, to teach math, to teach all sorts of things, but it's around how do you encounter a challenge, work through that challenge, and then learn from how you encountered that challenge and take things on to the next challenge you have to face. So anyway, that whole experiential field that was begun with Kurt Hahn and others has gotten into ropes course stuff. So they they were looking at it, some Outward Bound instructors were looking at it, and they were saying, well, we want to be able to do these, have the same impact that we have if we take kids on 2-week expeditions. But we can't take every kid on a 2-week expedition. We can't afford it. So they looked at what can we do in this time frame? And they developed these activities that do the same things, but in a more compressed time frame.
I see.
And so that's
on land.
On land.
Yeah.
On land and in trees mostly.
Yeah.
So there's low core stuff that's right on land, and then there's high ropes core stuff where you're in harnesses and on belay using rock climbing techniques.
I think I've heard of that stuff.
Yeah. So
you taught that?
Yeah, I did that for 6 years.
Wow.
And so the great thing about this job, other than I learned so much, all my foundational stuff on experiential ed, how to set up experiences and facilitate them and help students to draw learning out of those experiences. It was a 9-month position, but they paid me 12 months 3/4 time, which gave me 3 months each year to go sailing.
Oh, nice. So where was that job at?
Bellingham.
Oh, okay.
On Lake Samish.
On Lake Samish up there.
Yeah, on the
Really?
north end of Lake Samish.
What's there? What?
It's a camp called Lutherwood.
Huh. Okay.
It's run by the local Lutheran churches.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so go ahead there.
So I had this good job. I was, paid pretty well, and I had 3 months off each year to go sailing. So the first year
To work towards your captain's license.
work towards my captain's license,
Yeah.
Exactly, to get that sea time together, so I could get my captain's license. So the first year I had that job, I called up the Grays Harbor Historical Seaport, the folks that own and operate Lady Washington and Hawaiian Chieftain, and I said, "Can I apply for your volunteer program?" And they said, "Sure." So I applied for their volunteer program, and they accepted me, and I started as a volunteer in 2001, just a few weeks after September 11th. And I was a volunteer for about a month, and then our cook left, and the captain was hard up for a cook, and I said, well, I'll cook. And he said, "Have you ever cooked on a boat before?" I'm like, "No, but I'll give it a try." And he had been a cook. He had started as a cook, and he's like, "Well, I'll help you out." So I was the cook. For a month, and then the bosun left, and I had some previous boating experience, and so they hired me as the bosun, which was the bosun, in my opinion, is the best job on the boat.
Now, what does a bosun do on a boat like that?
The bosun is in charge of maintaining the hull, deck, and rig. So on Lady, it's all of the 17th century technology. So the engineer deals with the 19th century, and the bosun deals with the 17th century.
Yeah.
So it's great stuff. You're doing all the varnish and the paint, and on Lady, you're doing all of the rigging. And one of the really cool things about Lady Washington is there's probably less than 30 pounds of metal in her rig. Everything is tied and lashed together. Like the shrouds that support the mast are rope.
Wow.
And they're not, and they're all lashed together with round seizings, and so you're not like using turnbuckles.
Wow.
It's all dead eye and lanyard.
She was originally.
Yeah,
in the 1700s.
she's very so. The materials are all synthetic, so she's not a natural fiber rig.
Yeah.
But she's still a fiber rig.
Yeah.
So
cool.
The thing about that is it just lasts longer.
And who was the captain of the ship at that time?
My first 2 seasons, I sailed with Brad. Man, what was Brad's last name? Brad Sousa.
Okay.
I sailed with Brad Sousa the first 2 seasons. And then, but I made one more increase in rank in my first season. So then the mate left, and then they hired me as the mate.
Nice.
So I always feel proud that I went from like volunteer to mate in my first season.
Nice, yeah. And I was going to say, for those listening, that I interviewed Les Bolton.
Yeah.
We talked about the Lady Washington and Hooked
Yep.
on Wooden Boats, episode number 3. So if people want to go back and check that out, they can.
Cool.
So you spent summers sailing.
No, I worked. So my schedule was I worked at the camp from like January-ish. No, from February to like October, and then I had November, December, and January each year off.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a rough time to sail around here offshore.
Well, the nice thing is that's one of the big reasons I went to work on Lady Washington, because Lady does her tours of California.
Down south, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to run up and down the coast a bunch of times.
Nice.
The other thing that was really cool is on my second trip on Lady was the trip that Lady made to the Caribbean for filming Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, really?
So I got to participate in that.
Cool.
Which
that
was a lot
in the
of fun.
Caribbean, huh? I didn't realize that. It was filmed there.
Yeah, so we got the call from Disney, and we needed to do a bunch of work to the boat for the movie. They wanted it to look a lot different. So we took it up to Port Townsend and we hauled it out. and we repainted the boat and
put a wheel on it, got rid of the tilt.
yeah,
right?
well, but that was just the wheel was just for filming.
Oh, okay.
So nobody on
Wasn't,
the
hooked up.
Well, it was. So it was functional.
Yeah.
And we could steer the boat with it, but nobody was comfortable with it offshore. So what we did is we rigged it up for when we were filming, but when we were transiting the boat, we put the tiller back in.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
So we painted the boat in Port Townsend, and then we sailed down to Long Beach, and we did about 2 weeks of filming in Long Beach. So down there, we had to strip all the modern gear off the boat. So the life rafts, the running lights, anything that looked, 20th century, and that took a while.
I bet.
And then once we got that done, then the boat became a closed set, and they moved us onto the beach. So they put the whole crew up in the Hilton in San Pedro.
Nice.
And we weren't allowed on the boat because it was a closed set. And then they filmed for about 2 weeks in LA, and we did the storm scene in LA, and we did the scene where the two ships where they steal, where Johnny Depp steals the Lady Washington. In the movie, it's called The Interceptor, but they steal it. And we did those two scenes in LA, and then they gave us the boat back, and then we had to get it ready to go offshore again. So we had to put the life rafts back and the running lights and the radar and everything back on the boat.
Wow.
And then while we were doing this, we were doing some upgrades to the boat. So we tore down the diesel engine and took it out of the hatch. So the ladies' engine room hatch is like 2 foot by 2 foot. And so we had to tear it down to like cylinders and everything and send it up through the hatch. Some of the pieces that they were going to take off the boat and remachine had to go out through the hatch. And then some techs had it for a couple of weeks, and then they brought it back, and then we had to put it back down through the hatch.
Really?
And then rebuild it. And we were under a really tight schedule. So we did.
A little tense.
Well, we did the sea trial as we were leaving LA Harbor. So, like, we did the mechanics were on board sea trialing the engine, and then they sent out a ribby to pick up the mechanics and bring them back, and we just kept going down the coast to Mexico.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we were under a really tight schedule, so we were planning very minimal stops. So we put big fuel bladders on deck. They were like rubber and like 5 foot tall and like 6 feet long, and were like 400 gallons apiece. So we did our trip to the Caribbean. We went LA to Acapulco to Panama, and then Panama. We were supposed to go Panama right to St. Vincent, but we weren't able to go.
So you motored most of the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because you had to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they wanted us there now. They're like, why aren't you here yet? You're like, well, we're trying. We're really, really trying.
Yeah. So you worked at Lutherwood for 6 years?
Yeah. And then, so about like 4 years in. Yeah, I think 4 years in, I had gotten my license. And then I was
Your 100-ton captain's license from the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. So about 4 years in, I got that, and then I worked for the camp a couple more years. And then I got a great job. My really good friend, and another Lady Washington alumni, Ben McKee, had gotten this job driving a schooner for a company called Odyssey Wilderness Programs, and they were doing drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs for high school students in the San Juan Islands and on the Olympic Peninsula. So the students spent 2 weeks backpacking and then 2 weeks sailing. And so Ben was driving the boat for the sailing portion, and he needed a relief captain. And he's like, Tyson, you should come and do this. And I said, yes, I should come and do that. That's exactly what I want to do. It's, transformative work with kids and boats. That sounds great. So I stopped working at the camp, and I went and I did that full time. And that, again, was kind of seasonal work. So I was working there, and then I was still working on Lady. So I worked I worked 2 more seasons on Lady. Yeah. And then I worked 3 years for that company. And the first 2 years we were running big schooners, big wooden, actually, let me take that back, medium-sized schooners, so 50 to 60 feet.
Out of Seattle or where?
Out of Bellingham.
Bellingham, okay.
So the company bought an old, Murray Peterson coasting schooner called Sirena that was built in Anacortes in the 80s.
Oh.
And then occasionally we would charter the Sophia Christina that was built by David Jackson in Anacortes in the 80s. And she's a little bigger. So she's a shrunk-down version of a Boston Pilot schooner. She's about 55 on deck and somewhere close to 65 overall. Gorgeous, gorgeous boat. Sailed way better than the Murray Peterson boat. And then so that we had those boats for 2 years, and then we made a big switch my last season, and we switched from the schooners to longboats. So the replica ship's boats. And we have the one here at the center that I drove.
So those are double-ended open boats that you can row or sail? Is that what they are?
Close. So the ones that we have, some of them are double-ended. The ones out here and the one that we used for that program are transom stern. So they're replicas of ship's boats from the 17th century. So ours is called Discovery. The Northwest Maritime Center and Wooden Boat Foundation in Port Townsend has the Townsend and the Bear. And then the Old Anacortes Rowing and Sailing Society up in Anacortes has one called the Elizabeth Bonaventure. And there's one, the company I used to work for has one called Resolution.
They're like
up in
24
Bellingham.
feet long or something?
Yeah, they're right in the middle. They range a little bit, but they're in the middle 20s. So Discovery that's here on the dock, she was built by Greg Foster in the Gulf Islands in 1986, and she's 25 feet long, and she has 2 masts. She's rigged as a schooner, and you can have 10 people row at a time.
Wow.
So there's people rowing, and then there's a rudder and a tiller, and there's somebody steering and giving oar commands when you're rowing. So this, other than working at the center, it's kind of a really close tie, but having the opportunity to run that boat on 2-week-long trips up in the islands is one of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do.
That was the longboat.
Yeah. Totally engineless, all oar and sail. We'd cover 250 miles in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And you just ride the tide back and forth. So live and die by the tide table. Because
and the currents too,
right?
Yeah.
Mostly the currents. The tide driving the currents.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's the current. Yeah, the current atlas. Many thumbed copies.
You don't want
of
to be
the
going
current
against those when you.
Yeah, when you're in a 2-knot boat, bucking a 3-knot current, you're not going very.
Is it a 2-knot deal?
It depends on how many people you have on board.
Yeah, 2 to 3 max. Probably.
Yeah, 10 folks, 10 motivated folks can push it up to about 3. So, but if you're going with a 2-knot, then you're doing 5, and you're doing good. So, it's all about the tide. It's an incredible teaching tool. The brilliant thing about that boat and boats similar to it is that you can teach the students everything they need, all the basics they need to know to operate the boat in like a half a day.
Wow.
And then you step back. What I would do is I would step back and I'd say, I want you to run the boat. I'm going to be here, and what I would say to them, I'm going to beep if you're doing something I think is unsafe. And I'll beep faster until I say, okay, we just need to solve this problem. And but what you should do when I start beeping is ask questions like why are you
cool.
Other than why are you beeping, like, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. I want you to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But they have the ownership, and the brilliant thing is it's small enough, the forces are low enough that you can let them pretty much do everything. Like we'd have them dock the boat and take the boat out, which we couldn't do with the schooners because they're diesel engines and bigger forces and a lot more potential for harm.
Yeah.
But with the smaller boat and the lower forces, they could really do everything.
Cool.
And they could really own the experience.
Yeah, and you slept on board too? Tented
Yeah.
up at night if you needed to?
No, we slept entirely on board. We didn't sleep ashore at all.
Okay.
And that's another interesting piece. You get in close contact with people on a 25-foot boat, because we'd average around 8 or 10 students, and we'd have about 12 people on board.
Did you tent over the booms? Or?
Yeah, so on Discovery, the masts come down and there's crutches, and the masts sit in these crutches and form the ridge for a tent.
I see.
And then you roll the tent out.
Nice.
So that's called putting the boat to bed. So every night we'd get into the anchorage, we'd anchor up, we'd have dinner, and then we'd put the boat to bed. And, it's totally a Chinese fire drill, because you have to move everything to the back end of the boat to deal with the front end of the boat. And then you have to move it back and forth. And you've got 10 people in this 25-foot space. And, yeah.
And you've got some people on the floorboards and some up on the
oars, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and you really have to work things out. Communication is key, which it gets back to how good a teaching tool these boats are.
Yeah, what time of year were you taking those boats out?
So they're April to October, September.
Wow, so you get any kind of weather.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have to cancel some trips because of weather? Or?
No, we just stay in port.
I see.
So those boats, most of those boats are Coast Guard inspected vessels. So they have, whenever the Coast Guard inspects a boat, they write you up a document called the Certificate of Inspection that says, these are the things you're allowed to do with this boat. And for boats like the longboats, they're more restrictive. So there's a wind range that you're not allowed to exceed, and certain routes, you're limited to certain routes. So we would just, if it was windier, we'd stay where, we'd just hole up. And then we'd hang out on the boat under the tarp for the day and read books or learn knots or do things.
Cool.
In that way, it's very similar to how it was back in the day, where you were, a lot more dependent and driven on the weather.
Yeah. So how did you make the transition then from doing that to Center for Wooden Boats?
Well, that program was a therapeutically focused program.
Okay, we're back there. We had a SD card got full on the recorder here, so we were talking about, Tyson, you were talking about the certificate of inspection for the longboat and how that had some limitations and you'd kind of hole up for the day. And then I think I asked you how you made the transition from that job to Center for Wooden Boats here.
Yeah, so that was that job with the longboats. That was a really therapeutic program. So there were instructors that would run the boat and do day-to-day with the students, and there were therapists that would do the discrete counseling stuff. And seeing that, I was like, that's another skill set I should get, is that more, I should get some more training on working directly with people, because it's a lot of this work, while we think about it as I call myself a maritime educator, but really it's about working with people. And that, I think you could say that about almost anything that anybody does. It really boils down to working with people. So I thought, I need to get more training in this. So I looked around for graduate programs in counseling, and I found one in Seattle. I had been living up in Bellingham, and my wife and I lived on a 30-foot sailboat up there for 5 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I found the graduate program that I wanted to go to in Seattle, and we actually tried to find a liveaboard slip for us in Seattle, but that was like 2007 when Shoal was being rebuilt, and before the economy went in the toilet, and everybody had boats, and we couldn't find any liveaboard moorage. So we moved ashore, and we couldn't afford to keep our boat if we weren't living on it, so we put the boat up for sale. And I was in graduate school for 3 years, and I finished with a master's degree in counseling. And when I was...
What school did you go to?
I went to a school called the Seattle School of Psychology and Theology. It's down in Belltown between the two Art Institute of Seattle buildings. And that was a really tough but really great experience, because their approach to training for working with people is to encourage you to learn about yourself and how you interact with people. So anyway, I finished that up in 2010, and the center needed somebody to teach youth sailing for the summer. And I was like, well, I'll do that. I don't have anything else lined up. And I'd like to be back at the center, and I'd like to teach sailing. And then being back at the center presented the opportunity to write some grants and do some other things. And so in the fall of 2010, we wrote a grant to the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation to expand the center's outreach to youth in the out of school time frame and underserved youth. And we got that grant in January 2011, and so they were able to hire me on full time to do what I do now, and that is run all the youth programs. And as part of that initiative, we developed we further developed some existing programs and created some new programs. So one of the really cool things that we do with youth here is we have what we call our day sailing program. And that is, we've partnered with different youth service organizations to train their staff to operate our boats, and they bring their kids down and they take them out out sailing on Lake Union.
Nice.
And so we have we serve about 500 kids a year in that program. So
at different schools around the area?
So not schools, but youth service organizations. So one of our big partners is the Orion Center, which is a homeless youth outreach. And then we work with El Centro de la Raza, which is a youth outreach in the Beacon Hill area of Seattle. And then we work with Consejo Counseling Services, which is a youth outreach in the South Park area. Another really cool thing we've been able to do is we've started a maritime-focused job skills training program. So we recruit underserved youth that are, struggling academically or struggling in some other way and are interested in pursuing maritime careers. And we work with them on a couple of things. So we do general employment skills training, so like how to look for a job, how to write a resume, how to present yourself professionally, how to interact professionally with a supervisor, and then we also do all the maritime training. So we teach them. Last year was the first year of that program, and we taught them how to do basic woodworking, and we built a couple of boats, and then we did on the water training. So we taught them how to operate rowboats, sailboats, and power boats. And that program runs at both of our campuses, both here at South Lake Union and at Camino Island. And here, they built a new umiak. So an umiak is a 25-foot skin-on-frame boat, and we use them here in our field trip programs. We put about 1,500 kids a year out on the lake paddling umiaks. And then up at Camino Island, they built a replica of a 14-foot Mojine Erickson skiff that was probably built in the 30s. We had an existing one, but we didn't have a set of plans, so they actually documented the boat, took the lines off the original, and then built a replica from scratch.
Wow. So you've been working with the youth here quite a bit. So have you there's probably some pretty good success stories, I would think, out there of kids whose lives have turned around because they've gotten their hands on something that they can feel a sense of accomplishment.
Yep.
Anybody come to mind? Or any?
Well, there's one kid who comes to mind in particular. I mean, they all for different reasons.
Yeah.
But there's a young man. His name is Troy, and so Troy went to a school in the Highline School District called New Start High School, and there was a gal who was a teacher there, a gal named Bev Maurer, who was a merchant mariner herself. Before she became a teacher, she was a deckhand and on boats running up and back to Alaska. And so she gets the maritime thing, and she thinks it's a good fit for students. And she kind of adopted Troy. Troy was really struggling. He didn't like he would sleep at the school some because he couldn't go home. And Bev got hooked up with an organization called the Youth Maritime Training Association. And through them, she was able to take all of her students, or not all of it, but like 30 students out on a trip on the schooner Adventurous. So YMTA paid part of it, and the Adventurous subsidized part of it. And so she took Troy and like four other kids on that, or not four, like 20 other students on that. And through that, Troy got super excited about being on the water. And then when we started our job skills training program last year, he applied for and got into that. And then we worked with him, but more so a guy named Gary Stauffer, who's the president of the Youth Maritime Training Association, worked really closely with Troy to get Troy into a training program in Astoria at Tongue Point. So Job Corps is a national initiative to provide youth with training that will help them get living wage jobs and move on productively. And so after Troy finished here in June, he moved down to Astoria, and he's at the Job Corps training program there. He's working on getting his AB.
Cool.
So
very cool.
He can be there as long as 2 years, and it's totally paid for. And when he finishes there, he'll have his AB certification.
And what does AB certification mean?
So that's able seaman.
Oh, okay.
So it's the entry level working on boats, not the driving.
Oh, okay.
So there's
building boats, repairing boats.
Like operating.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the entry level deckhand certification.
Yeah, cool, very cool. Down at Tongue Point on the Columbia River there.
Yep. Yeah, right in Astoria.
Okay. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time today, Tyson. And one of the couple quick questions here. For those listening that have never built a wood boat or used a wood boat, what would you say to them to encourage them about how great? I mean, I'm totally hooked myself, right? But what would you say to those people?
Well, a couple of things. One, it's not that hard. You can find boats that are easy to do. Like we do a lot of what we do. Other than our long-term stuff, in short-term stuff, we build a lot of boats in 5 days with a lot of different school groups. So we have school groups come for 5 days, and by the end of 5 days, they have a boat together. And some of them are pretty nice-looking boats. So don't get caught in it's too complicated. I could never build a wooden boat because it's too complicated. The other thing is wood is such a satisfying material to work with, particularly with hand tools. Like, you take the plane and you get a nice clean shaving off it, and it's a little bit physical. It's really satisfying in a sensory way. The smell and the sound is really cool. And I would much rather work with wood than any other kind of material that you can build small boats out of. And these days, there's a lot of different plans. You can find almost any kind of boat you want to meet any kind of need you have. I also highly encourage you, if you have young people in your life, to take on a boat building project with some young person in your life, because it's super satisfying for them to, like, one of the greatest things that I get to do in my job is watch people put a boat in the water that they built. Watch young people put a boat in the water for the first time they built, and just to see the look of accomplishment on their faces and the I didn't think I could do this, and we did it, and it floats. And this is the other thing that gets me. Everybody thinks that their boat's not going to float. I don't get what this is. There's some internal anxiety that makes everybody go, my boat's not, it's not going to float. And they're all so shocked. I'm like, well, that their boats floated. I'm like, but we took all the time to make sure that it would float. So why are you shocked that it would float?
Yeah, that's funny.
But those, when you can put the boat in the water and hop in and go someplace and be like, I did this on my effort, and I did it. Largely what we do here is as a team, but any boat you build is going to be some kind of team effort. If it's you and your buddy or you and your kid, or you and your grandkid, it's a team. Nobody builds a boat by themselves.
Right.
And that's what I find so compelling about it, is that it's a really significant thing that we can do as a group, and that can teach us about ourselves and about others and how we interact as a group.
Yeah, cool. Do you have any boats yourself right now?
I do.
What have you got?
Right now, I have a 14-foot flat iron skiff. So in 2009, so we sold my wife and I lived on a 30-foot strip-built cedar boat for 5 years, and we sold that boat in 2008. And in 2009, the itch hit, and I'm like, okay, we need a little boat. So my wife is the oldest of 5, and she had a sister who at the time was 16, and we said, we want to do something with Madison before, like, she's too old to want to do something like that. So we had Madison come up for 3 weeks, and the 3 of us together built this boat.
Nice.
Yeah.
So is that a plank-on-frame boat?
No, that's a plywood boat. I got the plans from Wooden Boat Magazine.
Okay,
It's called a Babson Island 14. So it's a super.
I was just returning it.
Just set it down.
Okay.
It's a super simple. It's a super simple plywood flat bottom boat. The thing I like about it is that the guy Tom Hill designed it. And,
Tom Hill. Yeah.
And he thought about what it would look like, and so he did the framing so that it looks like a planked boat. And sometimes people think, oh, that's a plank boat, because it's got framing, and it's got like 1x2 fur frames in it, and it's got a traditional seat riser, so it doesn't look as much like a plywood boat.
It's got a transom and a little outboard on it then?
Well, you could. So I turboed mine. The designed rig was they just said put the rig from a nutshell pram on it, and that's only like a 40 square foot rig. So I thought that's not as much sail as I'd like to have on my boat.
Yeah.
So I designed a new rig for it, and I did a little leg of mutton rig, but I did it Gunter style. So I've got a small mast. I've got like a 12-foot mast that fits in the boat, and then I've got a Gunter yard that lives lashed onto the sail. And then I just make my halyard partway on the yard and haul it up so I can get like 14 feet of hoist on like a 10-foot mast. So all of my spars fit in the boat.
Oh, nice.
And it rows decent. It sails pretty decent. I mean, it'll in like 10 knots of breeze, running downwind, she'll get up on a plane.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Very cool. So for people listening that want more information about the Center for Wooden Boats or would like to talk to you, what kind of contact information you got?
So you can get my contact info off the center's website, which is cwb.org, and if you go to the page with the staff list, it's on there. Tyson Trudel.
Okay. And do you know what the phone number is here?
Yeah. The phone number for the center is 206-382-2628.
Okay, very good. And any parting comments for our listeners today?
Build boats with kids. It's fun.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Tyson, for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Tyson, for taking the time to do the interview down at the Center for Wooden Boats. It was really fun talking to you. And hearing your story with boats is pretty sweet. I'm a little jealous that I'm not a captain and didn't spend time on the Lady Washington and do some of the fun stuff you did. But you may be jealous that I'm an accountant. I don't know. Probably not, though. Anyway, thanks again for doing that. I would appreciate if you would connect with me. Email is dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can go to my website, hookedonwoodenboats.com, and each episode that I publish on Thursday, I write show notes on the website, and I have pictures. So be sure and check out the pictures if you're listening to this audio. And at the very bottom of each show, you can leave comments there. You can also share the podcast on Facebook and Twitter with some buttons there. And the other cool thing is that there's now a menu at the top of my website that says Index. If you go to that page, there's a table there that lists all the episodes I've published by number, who is in the episode, and what the episode is about. So it's a quick way to scroll through and look at and pick out what you want to listen to. And then you can click on the show number, which is a hyperlink that'll take you to that page. You can look at the pictures, read the blog posts, and listen to the podcast. Pretty cool. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest if you look for Wooden Boat Dan. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so by going to iTunes and to the store, search for podcast Hooked on Wooden Boats, and you subscribe there. Or from my homepage, you can click on the orange RSS button to subscribe. Let's see, the only other thing I want to mention here is I do have an affiliate marketing relationship with Jamestown Distributors, which sells boat building supplies and marine supplies. If you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/JD and you make a purchase, I get paid a little bit, which is helpful. Appreciate that. You can also go to iTunes, give me a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. And on my website, I have a store. The menu tab says store, and if you go there, you can buy t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, flip-flops, a new Maserati with Hooked on Wooden Boats logo. No, just kidding on that one. But yeah, you can get the other stuff with the Hooked on Wooden Boats graphic, which is pretty cool. So check it out. Well, thanks for tuning in again this week. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. God bless, and have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.